Maya Johnson woke up every morning to the sound of her grandmother humming old gospel songs in the tiny kitchen of their Detroit apartment. The walls were thin and the paint was peeling, but Maya did not care about what she could not see. Her world was filled with sounds that painted pictures more beautiful than any colors could ever be. She was 12 years old and had been blind since birth. Her grandmother, Rose, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. During the day, Rose cleaned offices downtown, and at night she worked at a diner serving coffee to truck drivers and late-night workers. Maya never complained about being alone so much because she had her music. The old piano in their living room was not much to look at. Rose had bought it from a garage sale 3 years ago for $50. The wood was scratched and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, but to Maya, it was the most precious thing in the world. She discovered she could play any song after hearing it just one time. It was like magic flowing through her fingers. Every afternoon when Maya came home from school, she would sit at that old piano and play for hours. Her fingers would dance across the keys and beautiful melodies would fill the small apartment. The music seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. She played classical pieces she heard on the radio, jazz songs from her grandmother's old records, and even pop songs from the neighbors' television. The neighbors in their apartment building started to notice Maya's gift. Mrs. Patterson from upstairs would pause in the hallway just to listen. Mr. Chen, who lived next door, would turn down his television when Maya started playing. Soon other people from the building began gathering outside their door in the evenings. They would sit quietly in the hallway listening to the beautiful music coming from apartment 3B. Maya's music teacher at school, Miss Rodriguez, was amazed by her talent. She had been teaching piano for 20 years, but had never seen a student like Maya. The girl could hear a piece of music once and play it perfectly. She understood rhythm and melody in ways that took other students years to learn. Miss Rodriguez started giving Maya extra lessons after school and brought her special sheet music written in Braille. Rose would come home from her long days of work exhausted and worried about bills, but when she heard Maya playing, all her troubles seemed to melt away. She would sit in their small kitchen listening to her granddaughter make magic with those worn piano keys. Sometimes Rose would cry because the music was so beautiful, and sometimes she would cry because she worried about Maya's future. Maya dreamed of playing on big stages in front of thousands of people. She imagined concert halls filled with people who came just to hear her music. At night, she would lie in bed and picture herself wearing a beautiful dress sitting at a shiny grand piano with bright lights shining down on her. She could almost hear the applause echoing in her mind. But Rose worried about how the world would treat her granddaughter. She had seen how people looked at Maya when they walked down the street. Some people stared with pity, others looked away uncomfortably. Rose knew that being blind and black would make Maya's dreams even harder to achieve. The music world was not always kind to people who were different. Still, Maya kept playing and dreaming. Every note she played was filled with hope and determination. She believed that if people could just hear her music, they would understand that she was capable of amazing things. Music was her language, and through it she could speak to anyone's heart. The old piano in apartment 3B continued to sing its beautiful songs, and Maya continued to pour her soul into every melody, knowing that someday, somehow, her music would take her far beyond those peeling walls. Alexander Sterling stepped out of his black limousine in front of the Detroit Music Conservatory and immediately wrinkled his nose in disgust. The building was old and needed paint. The sidewalk had cracks and weeds growing through them. This was not the kind of place where he usually performed. Alexander was used to the finest concert halls in New York, London, and Paris, where everything was perfect and elegant. He was 38 years old and had been playing piano since he was 4. His parents were wealthy and had given him the best teachers money could buy. Alexander had won every major piano competition in the world. He played with the most famous orchestras, and his concerts always sold out. Music critics called him a genius, and his albums topped the classical music charts. But Alexander Sterling was not a kind man. Success had made him cold and mean. He believed that most people who called themselves musicians were just pretending to have talent. He thought that real musical genius was extremely rare, and that he was one of the few people who truly possessed it. Alexander enjoyed crushing the dreams of young musicians who dared to think they could be as good as him. The Detroit Music Conservatory had begged Alexander to come and teach a masterclass for their students. They offered him a huge amount of money because they knew he was expensive and difficult to work with. The conservatory director hoped that having such a famous pianist would bring attention to their struggling school. They also thought it might inspire their students to work harder and dream bigger. Alexander walked through the conservatory halls, looking at everything with disapproval. The pianos were old and some had scratches on them. The practice rooms were small, and the walls needed fresh paint. He complained loudly to anyone who would listen about how different this place was from the world-class venues where he usually performed. The local newspapers had written stories about Alexander's visit for weeks. Radio stations talked about the famous pianist coming to Detroit. Music students from all over the city had applied to attend his masterclass. Only 20 students would be chosen to participate, and hundreds had auditioned for those spots. Alexander's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Other musicians whispered stories about his cruel comments and harsh criticisms. He had made grown men cry during masterclasses. Young pianists had quit music entirely after being humiliated by his sharp tongue. Alexander seemed to enjoy destroying people's confidence and dreams. The conservatory staff walked on eggshells around him. They tried to make everything perfect because they knew he would complain about the smallest problems. The piano had been tuned 3 times that morning. The music stands had been polished until they shined. Fresh flowers were placed in every room he would enter. Alexander demanded that his dressing room be exactly 72 degrees. He required bottled water from a specific brand and insisted that no one speak to him unless he spoke first. The conservatory director had to sign a contract promising that everything would meet Alexander's impossible standards. During his sound check, Alexander played a few scales and immediately complained that the piano was inferior to what he was used to. He said the acoustics in the hall were poor and the lighting was too dim. Nothing seemed to meet his approval. The staff scrambled to fix every problem he mentioned. Word spread quickly through Detroit's music community that Alexander Sterling was in town. Music teachers told their students about the masterclass. Parents who had children learning piano talked excitedly about the famous visitor. Local musicians hoped they might catch a glimpse of the legendary pianist. But those who knew Alexander's reputation also spread warnings about his cruelty and arrogance. They told stories of other masterclasses where he had been unnecessarily harsh to young musicians. Some teachers worried about sending their sensitive students to face such a mean-spirited master. Alexander Sterling was ready to show Detroit what real musical excellence looked like, and he had no patience for anyone who could not measure up to his impossible standards. Miss Rodriguez sat at her desk after school staring at the application form for Alexander Sterling's masterclass. She had been Maya's piano teacher for 2 years and knew the girl had extraordinary talent. But she also knew how cruel Alexander could be to young musicians. Her hand shook as she filled out Maya's name on the form. Miss Rodriguez had heard the stories about Alexander's previous masterclasses. She knew he had no patience for students he considered beneath his level. But she also believed that Maya deserved a chance to be heard by someone of Alexander's stature. Maybe if he heard Maya play, he would see past her blindness and recognize her incredible gift. The teacher made her decision and submitted Maya's application without telling her. She knew Maya would be too nervous if she had time to think about it. Miss Rodriguez also knew that Rose would worry too much and might not let Maya attend. Sometimes adults had to make difficult choices to help children reach their dreams. When Maya received the acceptance letter, she could hardly believe it. Miss Rodriguez had to read it to her 3 times before it sank in. Maya was going to play for Alexander Sterling, the most famous pianist in the world. Her heart raced with excitement and terror at the same time. Rose felt sick to her stomach when she heard the news. She had read about Alexander Sterling in the newspapers and knew his reputation for being mean to young musicians. She wanted to protect Maya from being hurt, but she also did not want to crush her granddaughter's dreams. Rose spent sleepless nights worrying about what might happen. The day of the masterclass arrived gray and cold. Maya wore her best dress, which was actually her only good dress that Rose had bought for church. Her white cane tapped nervously against the sidewalk as they walked toward the conservatory. Maya had practiced for weeks preparing pieces she hoped would impress the famous pianist. Inside the conservatory building, Maya could hear other students warming up in practice rooms. The sounds of scales and arpeggios filled the hallways. Maya felt both excited and scared as she realized she would soon be performing alongside some of the city's best young pianists. When they entered the main hall, Maya was amazed by how different it felt from anywhere she had ever been. The ceiling was high, and the space felt enormous. She could hear the echo of footsteps and voices bouncing off the walls. The grand piano on stage seemed to call to her even though she could not see it. Other students stared at Maya when she entered with Rose and her white cane. Some whispered to each other, wondering why a blind girl was there. A few looked sympathetic, but most seemed curious or uncomfortable. Maya tried to ignore the stares and whispers, but she could feel the weight of their attention. Alexander Sterling noticed Maya immediately when he walked into the hall. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance. He had never taught a blind student and had no intention of starting now. In his mind, blind people should not even attempt to be serious musicians. He felt annoyed that someone had wasted a spot in his masterclass on what he considered a charity case. Maya found a seat in the back row with Rose beside her. She folded her white cane and placed it carefully by her feet. Her hands were sweating and her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The other students continued to stare and whisper while Alexander prepared for the class to begin. Maya sat quietly, trying to calm her nerves and remember all the pieces she had practiced. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Alexander Sterling stood at the front of the hall surveying the 20 students who had been selected for his masterclass. His cold blue eyes moved from face to face, judging each young musician before they had even played a single note. When his gaze landed on Maya sitting in the back row with her folded white cane, his lips curled into a cruel smile. The masterclass began with Alexander explaining his philosophy about music. He spoke about the difference between people who could simply play notes and true artists who could create magic. His voice was smooth and educated, but there was something sharp and cutting underneath his polished words. One by one, Alexander called students to the front to perform. A nervous boy played a Mozart sonata, and Alexander interrupted him halfway through to point out every mistake. A teenage girl attempted a Chopin piece, and Alexander made her start over 3 times before dismissing her with harsh criticism. Each student left the piano looking defeated and embarrassed. Maya listened to each performance and felt her confidence growing. She knew she could play better than what she was hearing. The other students were technically skilled, but their playing lacked the soul and emotion that Maya naturally brought to every piece. She began to feel excited about her turn to perform. After the 10th student had been thoroughly humiliated, Alexander's eyes found Maya again. He had been waiting for this moment. He wanted to make an example of her in front of everyone. In his twisted mind, teaching meant destroying the dreams of those who were not worthy. Alexander called Maya's name with exaggerated politeness. His voice carried across the hall, and every student turned to look at the blind girl in the back row. Maya stood up carefully, unfolded her white cane, and began making her way to the front. The room fell silent except for the soft tapping of her cane against the floor. As Maya walked toward the piano, Alexander began his verbal assault. He announced to the room that they were about to witness what happened when people had unrealistic dreams about their abilities. He said that some people needed to learn their limitations the hard way. His words were designed to hurt and humiliate. The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down at their hands, not wanting to watch what was about to happen. Others stared with morbid curiosity, wondering how far Alexander would go with his cruelty. A few felt sorry for Maya, but none were brave enough to speak up against the famous pianist. Maya reached the piano bench and carefully sat down. She placed her white cane against the side of the bench and positioned her hands above the keys. She could feel everyone staring at her and hear Alexander's cruel laughter echoing in the large hall. Alexander continued his mockery, telling the audience that blind people should stick to jobs they could actually do. He suggested that Maya might be better suited to making baskets or working in a workshop for disabled people. His words cut through Maya like knives, but she tried to stay focused on her music. Rose watched from the audience with tears forming in her eyes. Her hands were clenched into fists, and she wanted to march up to Alexander and tell him exactly what she thought of his cruelty. But she knew that making a scene would only make things worse for Maya. She bit her tongue and prayed that her granddaughter would be strong enough to handle this humiliation. Alexander walked around the piano making comments about how disabled people often had delusions about their talents. He said that society sometimes encouraged these delusions out of misplaced kindness, but that real artists had to face the truth about their limitations. His voice dripped with condescension and fake concern. Maya sat at the beautiful grand piano trying to block out Alexander's cruel words. She thought about all the hours she had practiced in their tiny apartment. She remembered the neighbors who gathered in the hallway to listen to her play. She felt the love and support of her grandmother sitting in the audience. Alexander finally stopped talking and told Maya she could play anything she wanted, but his tone made it clear that he expected her to fail miserably. He folded his arms and waited for the disaster he was sure would follow. The room held its breath as Maya prepared to play. Maya sat at the magnificent grand piano, feeling the smooth keys beneath her fingertips. The instrument was so different from her old beaten-up piano at home. These keys responded to her touch like they were alive. She could sense the potential for beautiful music waiting to flow through this perfect instrument. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the hall could hear it. The silence around her felt heavy and expectant. She knew that Alexander Sterling and all the other students were waiting for her to prove his cruel words right. They expected her to stumble and fail, and give them a reason to feel sorry for the blind girl who had dared to dream too big. For a moment, Maya considered running away. She thought about standing up, taking her white cane, and walking out of the hall. She could escape this humiliation and never have to face these people again. Part of her wanted to hide in the safety of her small apartment, where her music was always appreciated and never judged. But then Maya remembered something her grandmother had told her many times. Rose always said that God gives everyone special gifts, and it is wrong to hide those gifts from the world. Maya knew that her music was her gift, and that she had a responsibility to share it no matter how scary it felt. She thought about all the people who had believed in her. Miss Rodriguez, who had secretly entered her in this masterclass. Her grandmother, who worked 2 jobs to support Maya's dreams. The neighbors who gathered in the hallway just to hear her play. All of these people had faith in her talent, and she could not let them down. Maya made her decision about what piece to play. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. Most professional pianists found it challenging, and many students would never attempt such a complex composition. But Maya knew this piece by heart, and she knew she could make it sing. She had discovered this ballade 2 years ago, when Miss Rodriguez played a recording of it during a lesson. Maya had been captivated by its emotional depth and technical brilliance. She had spent months learning every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic marking. The piece had become part of her soul. The ballet told a story without words. It began quietly and mysteriously, then built to moments of incredible passion and power. It had sections that were gentle and tender, followed by passages that were dramatic and intense. Maya understood that this piece was perfect for showing both her technical skill and her emotional connection to music. She placed her hands in position and took one final deep breath. She tried to block out Alexander's cruel face and the staring eyes of the other students. She forgot about the fancy concert hall and the pressure of performing for such an important audience. Maya focused only on the music that was about to pour from her heart through her fingers. In that moment before she began to play, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. All her nervousness and fear melted away. She felt connected to something larger than herself, something that gave her strength and confidence. She knew that whatever happened after this moment, she would have given her very best effort. Maya's fingers found the opening notes of the ballad. The first sounds were soft and questioning, like a voice calling out in the darkness. She played with perfect control and exquisite sensitivity. Each note was placed exactly where it belonged, with just the right amount of weight and expression. As the music began to fill the hall, Maya felt herself transported to another world. She was no longer a scared 12-year-old girl being mocked by a famous pianist. She was a musical storyteller sharing something beautiful and profound with anyone willing to listen. The piano became her voice, and through it she could speak directly to every heart in the room. As Maya's fingers moved across the keys, something magical began to happen in the concert hall. The Chopin ballade flowed from the piano like liquid gold, each note perfectly placed and filled with emotion that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. This was not just a young girl playing a difficult piece of music. This was an artist speaking in the universal language of the heart. The opening melody was hauntingly beautiful. Maya played it with such tenderness and longing that several people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes. She understood every nuance of Chopin's composition and brought out colors and emotions that many professional pianists never discovered. Her interpretation was both technically perfect and deeply personal. Alexander Sterling stood frozen beside the piano. His mocking smile had completely disappeared, and his mouth hung slightly open in shock. He had expected to hear a clumsy amateur attempt at classical music. Instead, he was witnessing one of the most beautiful performances he had ever experienced. His trained ear recognized immediately that this blind child possessed extraordinary talent. The other students sat in stunned silence. They had been prepared to laugh at Maya's failure, but now they found themselves completely captivated by her playing. Many of them had studied piano for years and knew how difficult the Chopin ballade was to perform. Yet Maya was playing it with the skill and artistry of a master musician. Rose watched her granddaughter with tears streaming down her face. She had always known Maya was special, but seeing her perform on this stage in front of these people made her realize just how gifted her granddaughter truly was. Pride swelled in her chest as she listened to the beautiful music filling the hall. As the ballet continued, Maya poured every experience of her young life into the music. The loneliness of being different, the love of her grandmother, the joy she found in creating beautiful sounds, the dreams she carried in her heart, all of these emotions flowed through her fingers into the piano. She was not just playing notes, she was telling her story. The technical passages that challenged even professional pianists seemed effortless under Maya's hands. Her fingers flew across the keys with perfect precision and control. She navigated the most difficult sections with grace and confidence, making the impossible look easy. Her years of practice and natural talent combined to create something truly extraordinary. But it was not just Maya's technical skill that amazed everyone in the hall. It was the emotional depth and maturity she brought to the music. She understood Chopin's intentions and communicated them with clarity and power that moved people to their core. Some audience members found themselves holding their breath, others wiped away tears they had not expected to shed. Alexander found himself thinking about his own relationship with music. He had spent so many years focused on technical perfection and competition that he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly moved by a performance. Maya's playing reminded him why he had fallen in love with piano in the first place. She was making music, not just displaying skill. The climax of the ballad arrived, and Maya met it with passion and fire that electrified the room. Her playing became bold and dramatic, yet still maintained perfect control and musicality. She built the tension masterfully, then released it in cascades of beautiful sound that seemed to wash over the audience like waves. Miss Rodriguez sat in the back of the hall with tears of joy and vindication running down her cheeks. She had taken a huge risk by entering Maya in this masterclass, and now she knew she had made the right decision. Her student was proving that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. As Maya approached the gentle ending of the ballet, the hall remained completely silent except for the sound of the piano. Every person present was caught up in the spell of her music. They had witnessed something rare and precious, a young artist sharing her gift without reservation or fear. The final notes of the piece floated through the air like whispered prayers. Maya played them with such delicate beauty that the silence afterward felt sacred. She had just given one of the most moving performances anyone in that room had ever heard. When the last note of Maya's performance faded into silence, the concert hall remained completely still. Not a single person moved or made a sound. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable in its intensity. Everyone seemed frozen in place, as if afraid that any movement or sound would break the spell that Maya's music had cast over them. Maya sat quietly at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys. She could feel the weight of the silence around her, but she did not know what it meant. Had she played badly? Was everyone shocked by how terrible her performance had been? She began to worry that she had embarrassed herself and disappointed all the people who believed in her. Her heart started to race with anxiety as the silence continued. She had expected some kind of reaction, whether good or bad, but this complete lack of response was terrifying. Maya began to second-guess every note she had played. Maybe she had made mistakes that she had not noticed. Maybe the piece had been too difficult for her after all. Alexander Sterling stood beside the piano like a statue. His usual confident expression had been replaced by one of complete bewilderment. In 30 years of professional music, he had never heard anything like what this 12-year-old blind girl had just produced. His mind was struggling to process what he had witnessed. Alexander had built his entire identity around being the best pianist in the world. He had always believed that true musical genius was extremely rare and that he was one of the few people who possessed it. But Maya's performance had just challenged everything he thought he knew about talent and ability. She had played with a level of artistry that many professional musicians never achieved. The other students remained motionless in their seats. Some had their mouths hanging open in amazement. Others sat with tears still wet on their cheeks from the emotional power of Maya's playing. They were all accomplished young pianists, but none of them had ever produced music that beautiful or moving. Several students felt ashamed of how they had reacted when Maya first entered the hall. They remembered their stares and whispers, and the way they had dismissed her because of her blindness. Now they realized they had been witnessing the arrival of someone truly extraordinary, and they had been too ignorant to recognize it. Rose gripped the edge of her seat with white knuckles. She could see the tension in Maya's shoulders and knew her granddaughter was worried about the lack of response. Rose wanted to stand up and applaud, but she sensed that something important was happening, and she did not want to interrupt it. Miss Rodriguez also remained silent, but her eyes were shining with tears of pride and vindication. She had known Maya was special, but even she had not expected such a transcendent performance. She watched Alexander's face, carefully trying to read his expression and guess what he might be thinking. The silence in the hall was not empty or uncomfortable despite its length. It was filled with the lingering presence of Maya's music. Everyone could still feel the emotion she had shared through her playing. The beauty of what they had just heard seemed to hang in the air like a visible thing. Alexander's thoughts were racing as he tried to understand what had just happened. He had spent his career studying the greatest pianists in history. He knew what separated good musicians from great ones. Maya possessed something that could not be taught or learned through practice alone. She had a direct connection to the heart of music itself. The famous pianist began to realize that his cruel comments before Maya's performance had been based on ignorance and prejudice. He had judged her by her appearance and her disability instead of giving her a chance to show her abilities. Now he was facing the uncomfortable truth that this young girl had more natural musical talent than most people he had ever encountered. Maya's anxiety continued to grow as the silence stretched on. She had poured her heart and soul into that performance, and the lack of any response was crushing her spirit. She began to wonder if she should just get up and leave. Maybe everyone was too embarrassed for her to know what to say. Finally, Maya could not stand the uncertainty any longer. She started to turn around on the piano bench, intending to reach for her white cane and make a quiet exit, But just as she began to move, Alexander Sterling found his voice, and everything changed. Alexander Sterling moved slowly toward Maya as she sat at the piano bench. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall, and everyone watched with held breath, wondering what the famous pianist would do next. Maya heard him approaching and braced herself for more cruel comments and harsh criticism. She expected him to tear apart her performance and make her feel small and worthless. But when Alexander reached the piano, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. Instead of standing over Maya in his usual intimidating way, he knelt down beside the piano bench. His expensive suit touched the floor as he brought himself to Maya's eye level. The proud and arrogant master pianist had humbled himself before a 12-year-old girl. Alexander's voice was completely different when he finally spoke. Gone was the sharp, cutting tone he had used to mock Maya earlier. Instead, his words came out soft and filled with emotion that he was struggling to control. He told Maya that in 30 years of professional music he had never heard such pure talent and raw emotional power. Tears were visible in Alexander's eyes as he continued speaking. He said that Maya had just taught him what real music was truly about. It was not about technical perfection or winning competitions or impressing critics. Real music was about touching people's souls and sharing emotions that could not be expressed any other way. Maya had reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago. The transformation in Alexander was so complete and unexpected that several people in the audience gasped in amazement. This was the same man who had been cruel and mocking just minutes before. But Maya's music had broken through his walls of pride and arrogance and revealed something human underneath. Alexander apologized to Maya with genuine remorse in his voice. He admitted that his behavior had been inexcusable and asked if she could find it in her heart to forgive him. He said that he had let success and fame turn him into someone he did not want to be. Maya's performance had shown him how far he had strayed from his love of music. Maya was stunned by Alexander's transformation. She had expected rejection and humiliation, but instead she was receiving praise from one of the world's most respected pianists. She could hear the sincerity in his voice and feel the change in his entire presence. The cruel man who had mocked her was gone, and someone entirely different had taken his place. Rose watched from the audience with tears of joy streaming down her face. She had been prepared to comfort Maya after a devastating experience, but instead she was witnessing her granddaughter receive recognition for her extraordinary gift. Rose felt a mixture of pride, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. Alexander continued speaking to Maya, telling her that she possessed something rare and precious that should be shared with the world. He offered to become her mentor and teacher, promising to help her develop her talent and achieve her dreams. He said it would be an honor to work with someone who had such a natural connection to music. The other students sat in amazement, watching their harsh teacher become gentle and humble. They had never seen Alexander show kindness or vulnerability to anyone. Maya's performance had not only moved the audience, but had fundamentally changed the man who had seemed incapable of change. Miss Rodriguez felt vindicated and proud as she watched the scene unfold. Her decision to secretly enter Maya in the masterclass had been risky, but it had led to this incredible moment. She knew that Maya's life was about to change in ways they could never have imagined. Alexander stood up and turned to address the entire audience. He told them that they had just witnessed something extraordinary that they would remember for the rest of their lives. He said that Maya had given them all a gift by sharing her music and her spirit with such courage and authenticity. Then Alexander began to applaud. His clapping started slowly but grew stronger and more enthusiastic. Soon Miss Rodriguez joined, and then Rose, then the other students. Within moments, the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the building itself. Maya sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the sound of so many people clapping for her. She had dreamed of receiving applause like this, but the reality was more powerful than anything she had imagined. The sound washed over her like a warm embrace, telling her that her music had truly touched people's hearts. The applause continued for several minutes as people stood up and cheered for Maya. Some were crying, openly moved by both her performance and the transformation they had witnessed in Alexander. It was a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Maya's dream of sharing her music with the world had just begun to come true in the most unexpected and beautiful way possible. 3 hours after Maya's life-changing performance, someone in the audience uploaded a video of her playing to social media. The person had secretly recorded the entire Chopin ballet on their phone and decided the world needed to hear this incredible music. Within minutes of being posted, the video began spreading across the internet like wildfire. People who watched the video were amazed by what they saw and heard. A 12-year-old blind girl playing one of the most difficult pieces in classical music with the skill and emotion of a master musician. Comments poured in from viewers around the world expressing their wonder and admiration. Many people said they had been moved to tears by Maya's performance. By the next morning, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. News websites picked up the story and television stations began calling the Detroit Music Conservatory asking for interviews. Music bloggers wrote articles about the young prodigy who had stunned a famous pianist with her extraordinary talent. Maya's name was suddenly known around the world. Record companies started calling within days of the video going viral. Executives who had spent years searching for the next big classical music star realized they had found something special in Maya Johnson. They offered recording contracts and promised to make her famous. But Alexander Sterling advised Maya and Rose to be careful about which offers they accepted. True to his word, Alexander became Maya's mentor and biggest supporter. He arranged for her to study with the best piano teachers and helped her navigate the complicated world of professional music. The transformation that Maya's performance had created in him was permanent. He had rediscovered his love for music and found new purpose in helping young artists develop their gifts. Maya's first professional concert was held 6 months later at Carnegie Hall in New York City. The venue that had hosted the world's greatest musicians opened its doors to welcome a 13-year-old girl from Detroit. Tickets sold out within hours of going on sale as people from around the world wanted to hear Maya play in person. The night of her concert, Maya wore a beautiful blue dress that Rose had saved for months to buy. She walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall with confidence and grace, carrying her white cane with pride instead of shame. When she sat at the magnificent concert grand piano, the audience of 2,000 people fell completely silent. Maya played a program that included the Chopin ballet that had made her famous, along with pieces by Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. Each performance was met with thunderous applause and standing ovations. Professional music critics who attended the concert wrote reviews praising Maya's technical skill and emotional maturity. They compared her to the greatest pianists in history. After her successful debut, Maya went on to perform with major orchestras around the world. She played in London, Paris, Tokyo, and dozens of other cities. Everywhere she went, audiences were moved by her music and inspired by her story. She proved that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. Maya used her fame to help other young musicians who faced challenges and discrimination. She established a foundation that provided music education and instruments to children who could not afford them. She spoke at schools and conferences, encouraging young people to pursue their dreams no matter what obstacles they faced. Alexander Sterling continued to be Maya's teacher and friend. Working with her had changed his entire approach to music and teaching. He became known for his kindness and encouragement instead of his cruelty. Other young musicians began seeking him out as a teacher, knowing that he had learned to nurture talent instead of destroying it. Rose quit her 2 jobs and became Maya's full-time guardian and manager. She traveled with her granddaughter to concerts around the world, always making sure that Maya stayed grounded and connected to her values. Rose never forgot the little girl who used to play on their old scratched piano in apartment 3B. Maya's story became an inspiration to millions of people around the world. Her music touched hearts and changed lives everywhere it was heard. She proved that true talent comes from the soul, not from what people can see on the outside. Maya Johnson, the blind girl from Detroit, had become one of the most beloved musicians of her generation. The old piano in apartment 3B was eventually donated to a music school where other young musicians could discover their own gifts. But Maya never forgot where her journey began, or the people who believed in her when no one else would. Her music continued to remind the world that beauty and talent can be found in the most unexpected places.